Hello, everyone. My name is Evan Freiberger, and we've got some new things to talk about today. And in fact, we've actually had an upgrade for today's severe weather event that's going to be happening tonight. And as you can see, we have a little tiny, but still an enhanced risk for severe weather. And that's going to be over here in the Omaha and Lincoln area. We'll be going over that later. And then hopping over to tomorrow's severe weather risk, you can see another day after that, and then yet another day after that. And if you thought that was all, unfortunately, you are going to be sorely mistaken, as we have yet another day after that. And this day might be uptrending a little bit. So we're going to be going through all of that in today's forecast and more. But before we get started, make sure you hit that subscribe and like button if you do end up enjoying this video, and consider sharing it on your social medias. And also on the last video, we got yet another donation, and I want to shout that person out. So huge thanks to Barb Mac for the 20 euro donation. Again, that really does go a long way in helping fund the channel, and we wouldn't be able to do any of this without any of you guys. So thank you so much. But let's go ahead and hop right into it. So for today's severe weather risk, we do have an upgrade. That's going to be over here near Omaha, Fremont, Blair, Nebraska City, Columbus, York, and Crete. That's going to be an enhanced risk, or a 3 out of 5 for severe weather. And then around that, we are going to have a slight risk. That's going to extend through parts of Nebraska, going into Iowa, Missouri, and Minnesota. And then around that, we have a 1 out of 5 for severe weather. That's going to be for parts of Minnesota, Wisconsin, going into Illinois, Missouri, even parts of Kansas are going to be getting in on that, and even South Dakota as well. Now, coming over to our tornado risk, we've also had a slight upgrade over here, a 5%, but this isn't the reason why we have an enhanced risk right now. But down over here near Lincoln and Omaha, there could be a brief moment if any of these storms can tap into just the right environment to produce a little bit of a higher risk here for tornadoes. It's going to be a 5% chance for tornadoes within a 25 mile per hour radius, not mile per hour, mile radius. I guess you could tell we're a weather channel if I'm using miles per hour instead of just miles. But regardless, around that, we also have a 2% extending from near Minneapolis, not in Minneapolis, down to the south towards Maryville, parts of Kansas, and just to the east of Grand Island there in Nebraska. Now, the main reason why our day has uptrended here is because we're getting more confidence, pretty much, that there's going to be a significant hail threat, especially down over here where you see this black hatched region with these dashes. That means 2-inch hail and above are going to be possible. This yellow area means a 15% chance for that kind of hail. And then over here in the red, that's a 30% chance for that kind of hail. So definitely going to be a dangerous day out there if these storms can really mature and drop up to 2-inch hail and maybe even higher in these areas. So if you live in the Lincoln, Omaha area, in the surrounding areas, in this small little red area, definitely need to be watching out, because there's some pretty high confidence here that we're going to be seeing some big hail today. Around that, we have another yellow and brown area. These are going to be for quarter-sized hail and above. Yellow's a 15% chance for that, and the brown is a 5% chance for that. But yeah, overall, a little bit of a more dangerous day than it was yesterday when we were looking at the model. So let's kind of break down what has changed. All right, so this is the HRRR model, and we're kind of zoomed over here into parts of Nebraska and Missouri. Keep in mind that in Missouri, we are going to have some severe weather still possible from about now until about 11 a.m. That should subside and then turn more into just rain and thunder over there, but then back up over here into parts of Nebraska and Iowa. As we push this forward, eventually we're going to start to see some storms fire up over here into this region. Don't worry, we're going to expand this into the Minnesota area in just a little bit, but as you can see, we do have some storms starting to fire over there in Nebraska, and that could extend all the way down a little bit further south than that and then push off towards the east into western Iowa. And so these couple of storms are definitely going to have that hail threat. So let's kind of come over here and look at our sounding. And as you see, we have some pretty low bases to the storm here and a low freezing level, which essentially means that's this little area right here that's denoting that freezing level. And that's pretty much when our red line starts to freeze. And that means pretty much any moisture above that in the updraft of these storms are going to have that capability to gain more and more hail, kind of freeze that together longer in our updraft. Also with that weaker lower level shear, and technically kind of on the line of being just strong enough to produce tornadoes, is going to be present around these storms as well. You can see we got that veering with height around 100 to 200 SRH, which is not a whole lot, but enough. A little bit of a capping inversion still in place as well, meaning some of these storms might struggle to mature, but it does kind of seem like they're not going to have any issue really pushing past that boundary. And we got our lapse rates at around 7.5. That again is going to be above 6, which 6 is pretty much just telling you that the updraft is going to be strong enough to be really locked in those hailstones up into this updraft. And we got plenty of instability, this dotted line in between there and that red line here. That's going to be where our instability is. And you can see it's kind of thick here, a little bit thicker than it looked like yesterday. So definitely some increased confidence looking at this sounding, which is probably why they upgraded to an enhanced risk. Again, these storms are really going to be getting started at around 5 p.m. and then they should be around their strongest by the time we get to around 8 p.m. Those tornadoes could happen as soon as these storms get started if they can tap into that little shear environment in there. And, this is going to be kind of like that storm that we saw in West Virginia where we had that 2.75-inch hail and a tornado warning. Thankfully, I don't think we got a tornado out of that event, but still, I would say there's a little bit more shear around some potentially more mature storms than we did have on that day. Looking back over at our map, keep in mind this is Nebraska over here. As you can see, these thunderstorms are going to make it into southern Minnesota as we go throughout the day. These hailstorms will track into the Iowa area. By the time we get past around 9 to 10 p.m., that tornado risk should be going down. But again, still a small tornado risk will exist as far east as potentially, central Iowa going over there into eastern Iowa by around 1 a.m. But after 1 a.m., it looks like these storms really struggle and start to fall apart, maybe transitioning more into a damaging wind threat as they move into the southern portion of Wisconsin. That's going to push off to the east as kind of a MCS moving across the Michigan lake here and then eventually pushing off into the Michigan area where we still could have a small chance for some damaging winds as we go into around 6 a.m. on the 18th. Now hopping over to day 2, you can see we do have a slight risk all the way from Texas going up into the Michigan area and around that a marginal risk here in the green. Our tornado threat isn't super elevated, but a small chance for tornadoes is going to be possible all the way from Texas up into the Michigan area with a 2% risk for tornadoes. But again, that's not going to be our main risk for today. Our main risk is going to be damaging winds and hail. And again, kind of the same areas are going to be in that area. Bay City, Detroit, Toledo, going down into St. Louis, Kansas City, Oklahoma City, over there just to the north and west of Fort Worth near Wichita as well. And then for our hail risk, it's pretty much in the same area. But look at this. They have put a significant hail risk down over here near Wichita, Lawton, north of Abilene. That's going to be a 15% chance for that 2-inch hail and above. So make sure you guys are keeping your eye on that as these storms move through. I think if we have any upgrades, it is going to be down here. Maybe can't rule out a small upgrade for some damaging winds, but I really do think down here is probably where our most favorable kinematics are for a little bit more of a significant severe weather event. And coming back to our models, after this storm kind of sweeps through the northern portion of the United States, we're eventually going to start to see a little bit of a boundary form here. It'll be really extending all the way from Missouri down into Oklahoma and to Texas. Now, if we zoom in here, not really seeing a whole lot of convection along the southern portion of this line as we move into around 1 p.m., but we are expecting that to eventually get its act together. Now, the question is, where do the storms fire initially along this line? We come over here to our 500 millibar winds. You can see that we do have a decent amount there, so there should be some forcing in that area, but it seems like most of that forcing is going to be relegated further up to the north. We also have an ejecting trough coming into the Utah area, and that's going to be bringing another little area of forcing back over a little bit further to the west in more like western Oklahoma. Again, that forcing is pretty much just spreading a part of the winds way above your heads that's forcing that air to rise up and creating some storms. So even if the storms don't want to go, they're going to have to. And then looking at our lower level shear, you can see that most of it is over here along our main boundary over further off to the east. So that's where, technically, if everything was in place, that's where we would probably see our highest tornado threat, right along this thin boundary going through, St. Louis going down into Oklahoma. But if we come over to our surface-based CIN or our capping inversion, or essentially the bottle cap on top of our storms that's keeping it from going up, or maybe say, you had like a sewer system and it's backed up like crazy. The only thing that's keeping that from spewing onto the street is that manhole cover. You can think of the cap as a manhole cover on top of a pile of, I'm just kidding, I'm not going to go that much into detail. But as you can see down here in Oklahoma and further up to the north where some of that shear is, we also have a decent capping inversion. So that should keep the storms at bay for the most part. Looking at our surface instability, it seems that the HRRR is painting a picture here that we have plenty of instability moving all the way down into Texas, up into the Midwest. So, although we do have some pretty favorable kinematics, some things are just not lining up quite as well as I think this storm would want it to. And as you can see, a lot of that instability down here remains untapped throughout the day as that capping version stays in place. But if we do get any storms fire and mature in this area, we are going to have to watch out for a little bit of a tornado threat with that. But then you get these storms firing further up into the northern portion of this that will still have some severe weather potential, but it's going to be kind of few and far in between. Now, back over here, we could have some more storms fire in the Oklahoma area. These could be more of an elevated tornado threat, as these will kind of be removed from our main kinematics. Sorry, I think I might have said tornado threat. I meant to say hail threat. So keep your eye on these guys going into around 8 p.m. on that time frame. And then over here into near St. Louis, looks like it's going to be around 7 p.m. there, and then move through Illinois and then end up in Indiana by around 11 p.m. And these storms over here need to be watched continuously pretty much from when they fire at around 8 all the way into around 12 a.m., maybe even further than that. We could get a little MCS form here into southern Missouri, and that's going to move probably through the area as we go throughout the night, bringing a damaging wind and maybe a smaller hail threat there. Moving into day 3, or the day after tomorrow's severe weather, we're going to have yet another risk. That's going to be a slight risk down over here near Killeen, Fort Worth, Dallas, going into southeastern Oklahoma, into northern Arkansas near like Fort Scott, Mountain Home, Cherokee Village, Paragould, Walnut Ridge, Jonesboro as well. And then over here into southern Missouri, Mountain View, Piedmont, Fredericktown, Poplar Bluff, West Plains area. Then we're going to have a marginal risk that extends all the way from the Texas and Mexico border all the way up into Pennsylvania through Ohio, Indiana, Illinois, Kentucky, and West Virginia. Now, we're not close enough to have individual risks, but we do have the probabilistic risks, and it does seem like, we're not really seeing any risks yet for significant severe weather for this day, but we will keep you posted. Let's go look and see what the models are saying about the 19th. So here we are at around the 18th, and then moving into the 19th, you can see the GFS, even at 1 a.m. has those storms like we were talking about. And then as we move throughout the day, it kind of falls apart, and then we get a little bit of a recharging of the atmosphere. As we bring up our 300 millibar winds, which is where we're watching for that, forcing that area that's going to basically push these storms that are afraid to jump off the diving board into the water and force them to convect. You can see that over here, we do have some winds moving a little bit further, into this direction, following this cursor here, and then more in this direction. So you can see there is a difference in that direction, causing some forcing over here near the Texas and Oklahoma area, moving all the way up, into Missouri, parts of Indiana and Ohio. So there is going to be some chances for severe weather. Now, coming down to our 500 millibar jet, you can see that we do have an organized trough aloft, and then also some overspreading winds in this area as well. So there will be enough wind aloft to maybe support a tornado threat as long as we have those lower level winds in the area, which we really don't have. Maybe a little bit over there in Oklahoma, but again, these winds are very parallel to each other. So we're most likely going to be seeing a linear line, which will make it harder for tornadoes to form, but technically not impossible. But another thing that kind of goes against this storm being significant is going to be that surface-based cape. As you can see, at least by the GFS's run here, we're not really seeing a whole lot of instability. The GDPS has a little bit more, extending all the way up into the Ohio Valley. The NAM has a little bit more, but overall, a pretty lackluster look here when it comes to our instability. So storm is definitely going to struggle, to convect storms and keep them mature and severe for a long time, because these storms are going to be starting to starve out there. We call this storm food. When you got a lot of instability, it's like a buffet, but when you don't have a whole lot and you don't really have a whole lot of SRH to compensate, these storms will struggle with not enough instability on this day. But you cannot rule out some hail and also some damaging winds, even with lower instability. As I push this through the 19th, you can see that some storms will be firing in and along that boundary there, with some of our, potentially stronger storms down here further down in the south into northeastern Texas, going into Arkansas, and then eventually maybe another round back over here near the Fort Worth and Dallas area as we move into the morning hours. And then by around 1 p.m., these storms should really be non-severe, mainly just some rain and thunder. Now, my opinion, it seems like we might have gotten a little bit of uptrend on our moisture for day 4. And as you can see, we do have a slight risk out here for severe weather. That's going to be for parts of Tyler, Shreveport, Monroe, Greenville, Pine Bluff, Jonesboro, Memphis, Springfield, and St. Louis. Now, Still a lot of uncertainty about this day. We are 4 days out, so a lot of things will change. But some of the models are indicating maybe a little bit more moisture, which might support, maybe a little bit higher of a tornado threat, especially given the fact that we are also seeing an uptrend in some of our lower level shear as well. So let's go look at that and kind of break it down for you guys. But, bottom line is if you live in any of these areas, you need to be paying attention to future forecasts to see how this threat changes over time. As we get closer, it will get more accurate. All right, so pushing this deep into the 20th here, you can see that as these storms try to recharge here, there's your little low pressure system out over there. Let's come back all the way up to our 300 millibar winds to see where our forcing is. And yeah, you can see our forcing is definitely going to be, pretty much right here. Or most forcing will be up in the Arkansas and Missouri area, with a little bit more subtle forcing down there into Louisiana. So storms will be forced to fire in that region, in that slight risk region. As we come over to our 500 millibar winds, you can see that we're looking a little bit more organized than we were yesterday. As you can see, this model has been struggling to get this going, and it sometimes forms that low pressure system, sometimes not. But as we get closer, it does kind of seem like that little surface low might develop over here in Oklahoma and Kansas, and that will definitely increase our upper level winds and potentially increase our tornado threat as well. If we come over to our model trends, you can see that there is agreement for this to form a surface low, but as you can see, the placement of that surface low is still kind of uncertain, and that will have big impacts in terms of where that tornado or the core of the tornado threat actually ends up setting up. But it really does seem like it's going to be anywhere, from northern Arkansas up into parts of Missouri. Now, one of the questions we had yesterday was the 850 millibar winds. It didn't really seem like, there was a whole lot out there, at least according to the GFS. And now you can see that has changed. If we come back over to our last couple of runs when we were looking at this last time, look at this. There was barely any wind shear out there. And as of our latest run, we've had a couple of runs here indicating that that wind shear might be a little bit stronger. And this will be enough, 40 to 50 knots to support potentially a strong tornado threat. So definitely going to watch these trends. I'm not going to say that this is going to hold. As you can see on our different models here, there is a little bit of agreement, but again, it shifts around in terms of location. But bottom line is that if this holds, it does seem like there might be a chance for strong tornadoes. And the last couple of things we have to kind of check off of our list here is our instability and our capping. And as you can see here on the GFS, we're also seeing a little bit of an increase of that instability. It's a little bit skinnier and not as, all the way throughout the warm sector, but there is more there technically than there was before. And if we come back, our last couple of trends here have been bringing that moisture up with a little bit of a downtrend on the last run. So is this going to be a storm with a moisture problem? Not exactly sure, but if you have 1,000 joules per kilogram in that kind of shear environment, there's a pretty good chance that you're going to be seeing some tornadoes and maybe even some strong tornadoes. But the UK Met, look at this, saying that we could have a little bit more instability than what the GFS is saying. Further up to the north, there's your warm front up there in Missouri, in Indiana, and also Illinois as well, and Ohio. So there probably will be an extension of our severe weather risk further up to the north. If we compare this instability to the Euro model, you can see that the Euro model is not really as bullish here. So definitely some question marks still, but it does seem like at the very least our wind shear and our spin is increasing, and a little bit of an uptrend here in our instability. At least something to keep an eye out for and to pay attention to for future forecasts. Yeah, essentially starting at around 10 a.m. all the way through about 4 a.m. we could have some severe weather all the way throughout this area, with again probably around the 1 to 4 p.m. region being our most dangerous time for these storms, as if they have enough instability and they get some mature cells and they tap into that shear environment, could definitely see a couple of tornadoes, and can't rule out a chance for a strong tornado. But again, still too much uncertainty as of right now to be able to nail down whether or not that strong tornado threat will be present. We'll know more most likely tomorrow and the next day. But yeah, eventually this thing moves throughout the country and then kind of comes out of our hair. But another thing that I want to talk about is, look at this. As I push this all the way back, you can see that we are going to have some areas kind of get rain over and over again, especially down in over here near Oklahoma, Texas, and Missouri. These areas are already quite saturated from that last storm that came through. And, we're going to continue to see storms after storms kind of move through that area. And as you can see from pretty much now until going into the 21st, we're going to have, a little streak here of around 4 to 5 inches over here, and then maybe even 4 to 5 inches possible up here of some rain. Now, if all that falls in, on different days, then, it's not going to be as big of a flood threat, but definitely something to keep in mind on is that, there could definitely be, some flooding with this storm as well. We compare this to other models, you can see that there is some pretty good agreement across the board here for an access here of a lot of rainfall. So just be keeping an eye on that, even if you're, not necessarily in a big time severe weather risk on any of these days, you might still see some flooding associated with these storms. Now, continuing with our temperature trends, as we all know, it's going to be getting hotter today by around 1 p.m. Going to have those 80s and 90s all the way up here in Texas, going up into Kansas, 70s in the southeast, still pretty cool up there in the northeast today, and then also up here in the northwest, maybe a little bit cooler there in Arizona and California than it has been these last couple of days. And as we move into the overnight hours, you can see that those temperatures are going to kind of recharge and come back in mainly into the southeast, where we could see widespread 70s and 80s across the board, really from Georgia into Arkansas. Also some 80s and 90s hanging out still over here in Texas, but over here in Kansas, Nebraska, the northern plains, we're going to see that cool down quite significantly as those first couple of storms come through the area. And as we continue to push this on, you can see that boundary slowly kind of traverses a little bit further to the east. And as we move into the main portion of the 19th, you can see that widespread 70s and 80s are going to be possible all the way from Texas, potentially all the way up into Maine. So definitely anomalously hot up there. It's going to feel like summer in Maine already as we move into the 19th. So just be prepared for that heat. I know a lot of you folks don't really have air conditioning up there, so just be watching out for those temperature increases. But yeah, 80s and 70s all the way from Virginia down even into parts of Mississippi, Alabama, Georgia, moving into Texas, also down there into Florida, then maybe even some 80s over here into Kentucky and West Virginia as well. As I continue to push this forward, you can see that that boundary really doesn't move too much during the next day, and it really seems like as we move into the peak heating hours on the 20th, we could have still widespread 70s and 80s down here in the southeast, making its way maybe even some 80-degree temperatures over there near Virginia. Relatively cool in the Great Lakes in the northeast, and then also back over here in the Central Plains, still pretty hot, especially if you're further up to the north. 60 to 50 degrees is hot for your guys' area. And then maybe a warm up trying to happen over here into California and Arizona as we go into the 20th as well. But thank you guys so much for watching. I do appreciate it. Your guys' support of this channel has been amazing. Even without all the hype and all the BS, we still do good enough to survive on YouTube and in life. So I do really appreciate what you guys do for this channel. And I will see you guys again tomorrow, or maybe even tonight if we have to go live for that severe weather event in Nebraska and Iowa. Have a great rest of your day. See you later.